Powerboat Television, North America's premier boating show. Powerboat Television is brought to you by Sea-Doo. When it comes to recreation, there is no contest. Boats and Places magazine, available in print or digital versions. And BoatBuys.com, 20,000 boats online.
Hi, I'm Mike Ridley and welcome to Powerboat Television. For the last 33 years, aficionados of antique and classic boats have been gathering here in Gravenhurst, Ontario in Muskoka. Well, this year is pretty special because the gathering here is just of historic race boats this year. So join us as we look at some great Canadian classic racers.
The day's activities kicked off with Canadiana Grand Prix rumbling out of the pit area for several laps, flying the American and Canadian flags. As the on-water demos got underway, I headed for the show docks to check out the amazing array of antique, classic, and replica racing machines that had been invited to this special show.
Now, one of the feature boats here is Rainbow 9. This is a 1922 Gold Cup racer, actually a Chris Craft, or back in the day, a Packard Chris Craft.
Restored in 1967, this 26-footer is the oldest Chris Craft racer. Originally powered with a Liberty V12, she held the world speed record in 1925.
Imchi, which means skedaddle in Egyptian, or beat it, is not an original boat. This is an exact replica of a 1925 Horace Dodge-built Gold Cup racer.
The original boat was one of Horace Dodge's favorites. He raced her hard for 15 years, competing for more Gold Cups than any boat of her era. But after a long career, she vanished. That is, until a collection of Dodge's drawings surfaced, and one of the greatest, most striking designs from the 1920s was built for us to enjoy once again.
Like Imchi, G36 Hornet here is another Horace Dodge-built boat, probably one of their most beautiful, they say. The original boat was built in 1925, repowered in the 30s, and raced successfully in Gold Cup races in 1934 on Lake St. George in the United States.
It's a 1950 Chris Craft racing runabout. To my way of thinking, it's probably one of the prettiest Chris Crafts because of its long deck. The boat with the original engine would do about 45 miles an hour, so it was quite fast for its day back in 1950. The engine that's in here now is a small block Chevy V8. Generates close to 200 horsepower and has a similar speed, about 45 miles an hour.
Later in the show, we'll have more from the Antique and Classic Boat Show in Gravenhurst, Ontario.
Welcome back to Powerboat Television and our coverage of the 33rd Annual Antique and Classic Boat Show.
When you're walking the docks here in Gravenhurst looking at all these great classic and antique race boats, sometimes it's hard to tell the old from the new. Now what we're looking at here is a repower, obviously. We've got a Mercruiser V8 in this old boat, and this boat itself is original, and it is a 1932 Minette Shield Hacker design.
Locally built in Muskoka, Shadow has raced extensively in many regattas, but now lives a graceful life, lovingly restored and pampered. Modern power makes this an excellent antique for reliable cruising on the lakes. Now, if you think all classic race boats are expensive works of art, check out Joe Fosse's 1950s home-built raceboat.
It's called a Canada 1 design. It was designed in 1950 for the Canadian Boating Federation in Canada. And approximately 40 of these boats were built and raced in the Canadian Boating Federation. And they were very popular and known as the working man's race boat because it was a do-it-yourself thing. You were encouraged to do it yourself and go to the local lumber yard to buy supplies. And so it was a very successful design, and they weren't in the 100-mile-an-hour class, but generally the speeds in the racing was around 55 miles an hour.
There's only been one small disappointment here at the show, and that's the wonderful boat you see here. This has been the debut for the showcase boat, Miss Canada 4, and it's unfortunate after all her great test runs and all, over the last 2 days, the mechanics just have not been able to get that big Rolls-Royce engine to fire.
She was originally built by Gravette Boat Works in 1948 and 49 to race for the Harmsworth Trophy. 34 feet long and powered by a surplus World War II Rolls-Royce Griffon aircraft engine, this 3,000 horsepower hydroplane broke the world's water speed record of 160 miles per hour in 1950 with speeds over 200 miles per hour. Purchased by Bobby Genovese, Miss Canada 4 was fully restored in 2012 and 13. Early test runs were successful, so it's unfortunate that the big Rolls would not cooperate on show day. After touring the docks, Peter Breen invited me to hop aboard one of his special replica classics, Cash Injection, to head out to the racecourse and catch the action. Throughout the day, the demo racecourse was filled with the sights and sounds of classic outboard hydroplanes, 70s and 80s drag boats, and modifies with major horsepower racing outboards. The real attention getters were the loud and powerful inboard hydroplanes that highlighted the great powerboat racing of bygone decades.
Later in the show, we'll have more from the Antique and Classic Boat Show in Gravenhurst, Ontario.
With the demo runs of the big hydros wrapping up, I headed to the pit area to take a closer look at some of the classic Grand Prix boats that were just being lifted out of the water. With Lauterbach Special settled onto her trailer, it was a great time to have a chat with her driver.
This is the Lauterbach Special. It is perhaps the most famous hydroplane in existence. It was built by Henry Lauterbach in 1976. Henry died 4 or 5 years ago. It's run in 3 different classes, J, H, and Grand Prix. Grand Prix is the biggest of all of the piston-powered hydroplane classes. It was a class that was developed in Canada. So 1976 makes it a little too old to compete today, and we run on what's called the vintage circuit. The Lauterbach Special was world champion 7 times, national champion 6 times, won 2 Canadian Gold Cups in 1978 and again in 80. 78 was Terry Turner driving, and 1980 was Tom Deeth driving. The Gold Cup was in Picton. It still holds a world lap speed record at 119.60 miles an hour. That has never been broken, and I find that quite incredible considering the boats that are running today. It was driven by the legends of racing. And we'll get a shot of the dashboard here in a minute because it was actually signed by all of those people. Terry Turner, he died a couple years ago. Chip Hanauer, who's just, one of the most famous there is. Butch Cropfeld, who's a friend of mine. Tom Deeth, who was here this weekend. Tom also is famous for driving Miss Budweiser. Larry Lauterbach, and from Montreal, Claude Campeau. drove it for a number of years. So Lauterbach Special. We restored it and just did the engine last winter. It puts out about 850 horsepower right now. It's a giant 565 cubic inch Chevrolet engine.
We've had a great time in Muskoka this weekend at the Antique and Classic Boat Show. Now, for their 33rd year, we've had a great time focusing on all the great racing history here in Muskoka and in Canada. And maybe in a future show in future years, this iconic Canadian race boat will be restored and in the water.
Owned by the Thompson family of Sarnia, Ontario, Miss Super Test 3 was Canadian designed and built. Driven by the legendary Bob Hayward, she won the 1959 Detroit Memorial Regatta race, as well as the Harmsworth Cup races from 1959 through 61. This superstar of hydroplane racing is a member of the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame. While predominantly a Canadian show, some fine examples of American boats were on hand, like this one Emmett Smith trailered up from the Antique Boat Museum in Clayton, New York.
Well, this is a replica of a race boat design from 1910. There was a community of powerboaters in the Thousand Islands, which is where the Antique Boat Museum is. They raced Gold Cup boats and all sorts of boats, and they decided at a certain point that they wanted to find out who was the best driver. So they held a design competition, and they chose a design by Charles Maurer, and they had 20 identical boats built in 1910. And they raced them for a few years, and then they became beloved family launches. Canadians and Americans raced them against each other up and down the St. Lawrence. And it's an interesting design because it's an interesting period. It's sort of before the planing boats became the dominant power. They didn't really understand exactly what made boats go fast and get up on top of the water. So this is a long, narrow boat. It's very sharp in the entry, and it cruises very comfortably at about any speed. Originally, the originals went about 18 miles an hour, which we consider pretty slow, but now these replicas go about 30.
As things were winding down after a great day at the show, it was finally time to wrap things up with some quality time on the water. Join us next week as Matt takes part in the Ride for Dad on the Detroit River from Amherstburg, Ontario.
To watch the show on broadband or for any questions or comments, visit us at powerboattv.com or follow us on Twitter.